Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to talk about how to build effective onboarding processes. And as firms, we talk a lot about growth, growing clients, how can we increase that, and bringing someone on at the very beginning or a client on successfully is so important to getting that done well. So that's our main topic. To introduce myself, I'm Tom Wadelton. I am one of the full-time virtual CFOs at Summit CPA Group. And so this is my role, is doing this kind of onboarding with clients and then the continuing service with them. Happy to be here. I work in Indiana. I'm pretty active with the Indiana CPA Society. So looking forward to this discussion today. A couple of administrative things that I have to cover. Like all CPE events, consider the same kind of rules. So we're going to give one CPE credit for today's session. You do have to attend the entire 50-minute session. We will have poll questions, and so people need to answer those. If you complete that, you will get the CPE certificate and also the slides from today's presentation. So those will be sent out for everyone. A little bit about Summit CPA Group. So that's who the webinar is coming to you from today. So we have been providing CFO and back office services since 2004. In 2013, we went to a fully distributed firm. So we got a lot of flexibility with where our employees and where our clients are located. And we're currently about 5,500 employees throughout the world. So a little bit about our two speakers today. Lydia Rapp is a project manager with Summit CPA Group, and she has been really instrumental in significant changes that we made to our onboarding process that we're very proud of. Jamie was instrumental. He is our director of accounting, very instrumental in Lydia joining the company and saw this as one of the key areas that we should look over. Jamie oversees all of our accounting operations within the company. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Good to be here.
So Lydia, I'll let you introduce this first piece, which will lead us right into our very first polling question.
Yeah, great. So we just wanted to start with kind of framing the conversation and get everyone thinking about why you're here today, what it is you're looking to solve, and kind of where you're currently at with your onboarding process. It's one of the things that I think is really, really critical to client satisfaction and happiness. And it is really important that you have it well dialed in. So it's a good opportunity for us to all just kind of like take a minute and think about that. And then I think, Jamie, you were going to share a little bit about how Summit came to the point where the firm felt they needed a little bit more structure around client onboarding and kind of some more resource allocation there.
Yeah, definitely. So while you're answering this question, I'm going to give you a little bit of our story, because at any point in time, we could have answered this question differently. So I would say very early on when I started with Summit, I would say our onboarding process was very loose. We knew what we had to get done. We knew how much time we wanted to get it done in, but it just kind of went from there. And so, it was a very loose process. And so as we got more involved, we decided, okay, we needed to put some structure behind this. And at that time, we were using accountants to do the onboarding. So we basically designated one of our really strong accountants who seemed to be really good at setting up clients and had them help us with the onboarding process and kind of build some structure around it. And I'd say that was a big step for us to actually put steps and processes behind it. And we'll talk about that more later on here, but that was really key for us. And then in addition to that, the next really big milestone for us was when we discovered the importance of onboarding. It was a great way to introduce two-way communication. So not only for the clients to tell us why they came to us and what they're looking for and what was important to them, but also for us to say the same thing. After we did so many onboardings, we kind of knew what made an onboarding successful, and we used that time in onboarding to say, hey, if we want to be a successful client, we want to work well together, these are some of the things that we need you to do for us. And that comes to communication, that comes to a lot of other ways that things are done. And so we introduced that process later on. And I'd say the last milestone was really bringing on Lydia. So prior to that, like I said, we had accountants doing this. And again, while they had their strengths, they weren't really project managers. And that's really what onboarding needs. It needs someone that is going to manage it as a project and manage it as a point where there's milestones that need to be done. If those milestones aren't done on time, we need to be aware of that so we can move a little bit faster. And so that's really where bringing Lydia came in and said, hey, instead of having accountants do this, why don't we have someone who's trained in project management and really knows how to make projects work do this? And I could say our onboarding process since we brought Lydia in about 2 years ago has grown and gotten much, much better, because we are away from just having accountants doing it and having true people who understand how projects work doing it.
Yeah, that's great. Let me show you really quick the results so you can see how our audience kind of breaks down. So it looks like about a third of the people don't have a formal process at all. and then kind of split in the middle where a little bit less than a third have some best practices and then some documented process. So kind of a good view of who our audience is today.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start for just about everybody. We'll have some information here about how to get started building something if you don't have any type of structured process yet, and some content about how to refine and improve your process and make sure it continues to provide the outcomes that you want as your organization grows and changes and staff changes, and we just navigate the landscape of onboarding and getting new clients. And then, Jamie, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the role of having a project manager versus an accountant. And I think one of the big wins there too that we see is it makes defining the roles really clear. It really helps identify scope creep and just sort of like making sure that there isn't anything left undone at the end of onboarding. There isn't an accountant that's kind of like still doing the onboarding accountant isn't kind of still doing some work and, oh, I'll just keep doing this thing for a few more weeks, and then all of a sudden it's 6 months later and that task hasn't been completely headed off. I am very clear with the internal team about how I am not an accountant, and things that are not my specialty, I very, very much leave to the experts and make sure that they do their role well. My role is really about ensuring that we get all the big important things done, that we have good communication with the clients, and then just helping make sure the processes are clear and efficient as possible among the team. And I feel really great and fulfilled in that role, and I get really good feedback from the team as well. So it's been working pretty good for the last 2 years.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's one of the biggest things we saw there was the scope creep, but also again just someone who's responsible for the process and responsible for the steps that need to be taken.
Mm-hmm. So we'll start with talking a little bit about how to put a system into place, but if you already have an existing system, this is a great way to sort of think about, is this process that we have really delivering the outcomes that we want? And if it isn't, this next part of the conversation might help you identify where those gaps could be, because it's really hard sometimes when you're deeply in the work to zoom back out and evaluate, how do I make this process work a little bit more effectively? So one of the first things that's important to do, and this is also something that we kind of do in real time as part of our process as well. We started out with this basic framework of who are the stakeholders? Who do we need to ensure are receiving deliverables, getting things done, seeing those outcomes come into play throughout the course of onboarding and the service relationship with our clients? First of all, of course, it's the client. There's usually some primary and secondary points of contact in there. We leave some flexibility in this because, I hear all the time, oh, every client is different. Every client is different. But one of the first things we need to do is identify who the partners are that we're working with, what are their roles in the company, and who we're going to need to be going to get the information that we need. So we kind of redo this just about every time we start an onboarding, just to make sure that we all have the appropriate scope internally and we know who the team members are that we're working with. It's really important to also have that clearly documented somewhere so that all of the internal services team know who the primary contacts are. So that we're not asking the wrong people or duplicating efforts or asking the same question of 4 or 5 different people before we get the answers that we need. And that just relieves some stress initially when we're starting to build that relationship with the client as well.
Lydia, I'm curious, when we went through that process to identify the different roles and stakeholders and things like that, were there any that come to mind that we said that's not really a stakeholder of this process, that maybe would be tempting to consider someone part of a process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think sometimes one of the things that's important to identify is whether that individual is a source of information or a stakeholder in the outcome of a deliverable. Mm-hmm. That really also helps identify boundaries as you're getting into the full-blown complex process that is onboarding when you're doing a ton of things at once. So oftentimes somebody who is a source of information but not necessarily a stakeholder is an outgoing firm or an outgoing bookkeeper who's going to be rolling off the account. That is a contact that we want to make sure that we have as positive an interaction with as possible. We want to pull information from them, be professional, I tell people all the time, we do handoffs both ways. So we always want it to be a great experience with everyone. But that person isn't necessarily a stakeholder in the outcome of the onboarding. Another example could be maybe an administrator who is just helping you with account access, or somebody who's going to be maybe like pushing send on payroll and has to send you a report. There's someone we need information from, but they're not necessarily a stakeholder in the outcome of what financials look like, or a forecast, or sitting in on a meeting about what we're going to do with the chart of accounts, or consulting on a high level thing. Yeah, so maybe just understanding the roles is another good way to think about this, especially when you're getting into the client relationship and what the client's expectations are of the team that they're bringing to the table is another really good thing to talk about. And if it feels fuzzy at the beginning, it's going to feel fuzzy the whole way out. And if you don't define it at the beginning, you will definitely be given opportunities to define it down the road. But if you can do it proactively instead of reactively, everybody's usually a lot happier.
Okay.
I think the other part of that question, Tom, that I think is really important is to understand the service you're providing. So like, for us, one of our key services is a forecast, right? And so like, I know not all virtual CFO firms think like that, but for us, like building a forecast is really key to what we do, and it's what we sell. It's what is really important to us. And so every company, the people you need involved in building the forecast is going to be different. Sometimes it's just the owner. The owner is going to be the one that builds the forecast, and the owner is going to understand every element of the account. And so that's a key player that you need to have involved. For some companies, they're really going to want their marketing department determining their own forecast, right? So the marketing department is going to need to be involved in that conversation of how much spend they have, what projects they plan on working on, or they're going to want their firm administrator understanding, okay, our rent's going up, or these type of things. And so I think every company you work with is going to be a little different with that. So it's not everybody's going to fit into this nice clean box. And so I think the important thing there is understanding what services you're going to provide, and making sure that you understand that every time you provide those services, the companies can be a little different, and who's involved in making sure you get the right answer can be a little different as well.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, and one of the ways we track that is we have a document that we use internally where we keep notes on all of our internal meetings, and right up at the top of that document, we have the list of client services and the list of contacts for that client along with their role. So if we ever need like a reference point when we're having a conversation internally about forecasting or whatever the deliverable might be, and we're going, who do we need in the room for that meeting? We can always go back up to that list and kind of talk about it internally before we send any request to the client. So we're not bogging them down in their day-to-day more than we have to with onboarding. Great. Another key stakeholder is your sales team. That should be a pretty easy one to identify, but you want that handoff to be really, really smooth from your sales team to your onboarding and services team. This is kind of like, it's the next big impression that we get with the client. It's really where we start showing them what we're going to be doing for them. Sales teams do a great job of kind of showcasing what we do, defining the services that we're going to set for this client, but that handoff should be really, really smooth, and as many opportunities as you get to download expectations of the client from the sales team, use those. We get great videos of sales calls from our sales team, which is super helpful. And Jamie and I think we go back to those conversations with the client to sort of reset expectations and say, hey, do you remember when you talked to our sales team about XYZ that was really important to you when we initially had those calls? We want to carry that conversation on, and here's where the rubber is meeting the road. A really good example is like when we're talking about accounts receivable, oftentimes in a sales call, people will go, oh yeah, I'm ready to kind of streamline my accounts receivable process. And then when you get into the nitty gritty of that process, you have to remind them that was part of the conversation that we had. So all that information that you get from the sales team is super valuable. It makes that handoff a lot smoother. And if the client isn't having to repeat things that they said to the sales team, that also makes them feel like you're really engaged with what they need.
And to me, that's where you can look the most professional, right? Like, early on when we were a smaller team, we actually probably did a better job of this because it was easy, because the sales team was very closely associated with the onboarding team. And then we hit a phase where we got bigger, and there was just, we were selling so much that it was hard for the sales team to connect with our onboarding team. And so we had to come up with the solutions. Like Lydia said, we have the video, we have the notes. So that way it looks really unprofessional if they have an hour-and-a-half sales call with your sales team and they they tell them everything. They're telling them everything that's going wrong. They're giving them all these problems, and then, cool, let's go to the onboard meeting. They're really excited about working with you, and then the onboarding call is like another sales call. Can you tell us again what your key problems are, when they already spent 45 minutes talking about that earlier? Like, that just makes you look very unprofessional and makes you look unprepared. And so we try to make sure we go into it, instead of asking that, being like, oh, you mentioned with the salesperson that you're really concerned about your AR process. Can we undig that a little bit more? That just sounds better than just saying, hey, can you tell us what your problems are? So we want to make sure that we're one step ahead of that and not looking like amateurs when it comes to this area.
Yeah, and a common question we get around the recordings, because people like the idea, is do people object to the recordings? And of sales calls I've done, I've only had one time where someone said, I think I'm giving you like really confidential information about my business. I don't want it recorded. I said, that's fine. Usually people will ask, why are you recording? And I described, Jamie, exactly what you said for the benefit, and said, that's why we do it. Most people are like, oh, that sounds like a great thing to do. So with more and more Zoom calls, it's a pretty easy thing to say, hey, by the way, we're recording this and here's why.
Yeah, and if you're not recording, then you would want to ask the sales team to take really good notes on those priorities for the client if possible. But recording is always the best way to do it. And then you also get a feel for the personalities that you're dealing with, some of the dynamics. You know, that sales process is just such a great way to start to get to know the client. So when you come into the room, your onboarding team is already sort of educated who the players are, and they can start to grow that relationship really effectively.
Yeah.
And then next we have the services team. So the internal firm services team, your virtual CFOs, the consultants, the accountants and bookkeepers that are going to be working on delivering the services. It's really important to define these roles both internally to the firm and externally to the client. Summit brings a squad to onboarding. We have a kickoff call, and sometimes we'll have 6 of our team members in that call. And from the client perspective, we try to do a good job of defining what the roles are going to be for each person. They usually have to ask because it's a lot of information in that kickoff call, but we give them a visual representation of who everyone is, their title, and then talk through what their roles are going to be from the client perspective. Just a very high level overview. Internally, when you're talking about the role of the services team, if you can clearly define who does what for deliverables, it makes the onboarding process go much more smoothly. I think our firm has grown a lot in that over the last year. When I first came on, it was very much, you know, this CFO does onboarding one way, and this senior accountant likes to do X, Y, Z, and this CFO really likes to do revenue recognition, and this one has their accountants do revenue recognition. And it was a big learning curve for me because I'm not an accountant, so I was just kind of plugging and chugging information in as I was learning the flow. But I think we've done a lot of growth in that over the last 1.5 to 2 years to be able to really kind of build a little bit more consistency around who does what internally with the team so that we get to the outcome of that deliverable quickly, and there isn't 2 weeks that goes by where you're going, oh, I thought someone was going to do this, and then they didn't get it done. There's not as many assumptions, which I think has been pretty smooth. But Jamie and Tom, have you all had the same experience? I think it'd be great to hear from you, you both on that, since you're in the trenches on that level of work.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with everything you said. Like, you know, you've heard me say it 1,000 times. Like, I'm a fan of standardization, right? Like, I want to have as much standardized as possible, so that way it's people are getting the same product, but at the same time, you know, we want to leave a little bit open for having people be who they are, right? So we want to make sure we don't have it so standardized that we're just having robots work for us. But I do think that's, you know, the key to having the outsider come in and look at it, right? Again, not that Lydia's an outsider, but she's not an accountant. So I think she looked at it from the perspective of someone who's not an accountant and just asked the right questions of like, okay, why is every single onboarding I do someone different doing this one task? And it really helped me as a director be like, yeah, why is that the case? Like, how can we not standardize that? That should be pretty easy. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and I like the other role, to emphasize your point, Jamie, about non-accountant, given that none of our clients are accountants, right? So having that different perspective is really valuable, but then also just making sure that things stay on track. It helps clients so much if you say, here's what we're going to do in the approximate time frame, and then be able to come back and say, and we've got these things done and we're partially done, and here's what's holding it up. The main things for project manager just gives them that confidence that we're making the progress that they want us to make or have promised.
It also helps if there ever needs to be someone else picking up a task for whatever reason, out of office, or it might be a little bit of a stretch in terms of that individual's knowledge. Because this is another place where I often hear, oh, every client's different, and this revenue recognition is really complex, so I want to pick it up as the CFO, or I think my senior accountant might need a little bit of help before they can put this payroll allocation together, or something like that. If you have that role and responsibility for those deliverables really broken out, if someone gets to work that's assigned to them and they know, I'm not going to be able to complete it because I'm on vacation, or man, this, for whatever reason with this client, it feels like a stretch in terms of my knowledge and I need more resources, it's a lot easier to identify that in real time and then either rally whatever resources are needed around that task or that item quickly, as opposed to kind of getting lost in the shuffle. So I think that's kind of where we got a little pushback initially when we were pushing for standardization, is people are like, well, every single one is different. But if you have that skeleton in place, it makes it a lot easier to be able to move in real time and adapt when you need to, and just kind of deal with the surprises that come up along the way. Great, and then the next one is the account and project managers, which we've kind of touched on a little bit in terms of how we use the account and project manager role here at Summit CPA. We have recently combined the onboarding project manager role and account management role here at Summit, and we're seeing some great results from that. I think it was really important for me to have some time sitting in the project management role to really learn the expectations of the leadership team, to learn the expectations of clients, have a good understanding of what the structure needed to look like. But then once I gained that, I was really able to scale that out to other project managers on the team. And then when we started making that shift to having onboarding project managers also be account managers for clients, it has not been hard. We know the things that are really important to the clients, and even though we're not accountants, we're able to identify when things are getting laggy. Sometimes we can't identify what is causing the lagginess because we don't have the technical accounting knowledge, but we can pop that flag to the CFO or to Jamie, who still oversees all account management at the firm, to say, hey, something's not working here. We know it should be going a little bit faster. What do we need to do to address that and keep it moving?
Yeah, I'd like to touch on this just a little bit. So like, you know, I think I was in the account management role before, and what we mean by account management is just making sure that the client is getting what they signed up for, you know, and that's throughout the relationship. So that could be at month 6, that could be at year 6. You know, we want to make sure we're doing check-ins with the client to make sure they still are getting what they need. And when I was in this role, just because of my background and where I'm at with the firm, and also because of my being an accountant, I was trying to solve everything in that meeting. And sometimes the client just wants to throw stuff at you and vent. You know, I always think of the scene in White Man Can't Jump, where they're talking in the bed, and she's like, I'm thirsty, and he goes and gets her water. Like that's me. I want to just solve the problem, and she's like, I just need someone to listen to me. And that's exactly what I think Lydia and the project managers do. They actually sit there and listen. They listen to them and figure out what the problem is, and then they figure out how the best way to fix it is. So they figure, okay, these are the 3 problems. This problem is probably a Jamie thing that he can come in and fix because the CFOs aren't delivering, and this problem is more of a process problem that I can get involved in. And so I think the fact that we have our account managers and our project managers doing that initial conversation when there is a problem just allows it to go much smoother, as opposed to me, who's just like, man, I need to fix this, I need to solve this right away, and in this meeting we need to have solutions, as opposed to like putting the problems where they actually exist.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, and I think where that overlap in skill set comes in, and where the non-accountant project managers are maybe able to kind of deliver some experiences. You know, we have a lot of experience in customer service and talking through tech issues, active listening, and those kind of tools, to where when a client comes to you and they're really upset, it's almost nice to have a little bit of that separation between the services team and an account manager, because when a client is very frustrated about something, usually the first thing they need to do is get the emotion out and have someone hear from them. And since I'm not the one doing the accounting, I never take it personally. It doesn't hurt my feelings that they're really frustrated or upset about something. And it makes it a little bit easier to zoom out and start to identify where the solutions might be, and go through that process of active listening, make sure the client feels heard and we're accurately identifying the problem. And that problem, we've all solved them, but it's such a variation on what the actual solution might be. So having that sort of separation between the services team and account management, I think, is really, really helpful. Great. And then we have the leadership team. Of course, at Summit, we have some overlap between the leadership team and the sales team. So when we're doing that role definition and sort of defining how we're gonna achieve outcomes for every stakeholder that we have in this process. Some of those are overlapping between the sales and leadership team, and I think that's pretty common for a lot of firms, not every firm depending on the size that you're at, but it is pretty common. And some of the ways that we make sure to identify outcomes for the leadership team are our surveys. We survey our clients regularly, and the leadership team really likes to see those results and kind of see how we're doing, especially during onboarding. So that initial relationship is starting out strong and making sure we're getting that feedback in real time about how the client is feeling about the services and the process. And then, of course, metrics like profitability are really important to the leadership team. So that customer happiness and how the work is contributing to the profitability of the firm, I think, are two of the big ways when you can make sure, how you can make sure that the leadership team stakeholders are seeing the outcomes of the work that's happening during onboarding. But Tom and Jamie, you two are a little bit closer to that. So this is another aspect I'd love to hear a little more from you on.
Yeah, so just one to start with, we do have a question from Cheryl asking if the final 4 roles, the sales through leadership, are all part of the firm, and those are all roles that we have within the firm. But yeah, to the point of the leadership overlapping with the other ones, I think is very valuable that they're already engaged and know the different aspects that are in there, but then also just watching over, they know how important onboarding is. And we have a leadership meeting once per week, and one of the specific topics is onboarding every single week. And if it gets a lot of attention, Jamie gives all the stats on it, but if something is off the rails, it's being addressed right away. And I think that's an important part of their involvement.
Yep, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think that as part of the leadership team, obviously, it's something that Lydia and I meet every week on, and meet with the project managers. And it's really important to me that I understand where onboardings are going and which ones are going well and which ones aren't and why they aren't going well and what we can do to fix it. And then making sure that message gets to the rest of the leadership team, because not only it's more of that growth mindset, right? If we keep making the same mistakes over and over again, then we're going to continue to fail. So we want to make sure that if our onboarding process grows as we make mistakes. We make mistakes and we say, okay, that didn't work. Let's try that again. Let's make sure it doesn't happen again, so that it helps us become better at this.
And I will add to Cheryl, if you don't have a person in your firm whose full-time job is being an account or project manager, or somebody's overlapping and those 4 blocks internally for your team, that's okay. I think if you go through the exercise of defining what tasks and responsibilities fall into each of these categories, it's really helpful in kind of defining those lanes, even if you're at a point yet where you're not really maybe ready to hire a full-time or even a part-time person to only focus on one of those things. If you can talk about the role that they're playing within onboarding, even if it's not their title, it's really helpful. And then Jamie, I also wanted to touch again on that growth mindset, because I was thinking about it as you brought it up. That's one of the things at Summit, I think, that makes us really effective at responding to issues in real time, because we all know and really foster this in the culture at Summit that if something is going off the rails, what we want to do is hear about it as soon as possible. As soon as there's that tingle that something might not be going the way we want it to, or there's some confusion or misalignment in expectations, we want to be as proactive as possible about that, because it's not about pointing fingers at somebody because they don't have the knowledge that they need or they missed a detail. It's about how do we solve that problem as soon as possible without it having to be reacting to something breaking down the road, whether that be broken expectations or us missing a deadline or the client being frustrated because a priority that they feel was clearly communicated wasn't taken care of. We want to be as proactive as possible about that. And it's just all hands on deck. Whoever calls out whoever pops the flag on the issue, there's never any finger pointing at that person. We just kind of come together and work to solve it as quickly as possible. And that's a big part of our culture here at Summit. It's pretty key in the success.
So we have 2 questions that I think before you jump off the slide probably need to be addressed. So the first one is, how do you scale this for a smaller firm? And I'll take a stab at answering and then let you jump into as well, Lydia. But I think that to me the important thing is these 4 roles are still needed. Now these 4 roles might just be done by one person. They might be done by 2 people, but I think it's understanding who's going to do these 4 roles, identifying that and making sure they know that's part of their job duty. So, an example could be, your sales team and your project manager and account manager could all be one person, right? So that could be one person doing all of that. And we have experimented with that before, where the salesperson is the person that's following up with them and making sure that everything's going okay, and then is there through the onboarding as well as the project manager. So that's one way to do it. And then obviously your service team is the one who's doing the work. And so hopefully it's not the same person selling it that's doing the work, but it could be, could all three of those could be the same thing. And then, so it's just how you make sure you have those 4 roles and identified, making sure that the communication is still happening. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Lydia.
Yeah, I will say I think a good way to frame it, if you're thinking about, man, if I'm a 1-person show or maybe a 2 or 3 person show in the firm, instead of thinking about this as an individual or a job title, think about it as buckets that you need to make sure we have tasks that fall into those buckets. We have outcomes that deliver on those buckets. So leadership team could be a substitute for firm profitability. What does our NPS score look like? What happens when someone fills out a public survey on Yelp or our website and leaves a response? Those are kind of like the big picture. What does the firm need from the onboarding process overall if there's not, an individual person who's there? For project management, what is it that we need about the structure of how we complete these tasks and the workflow that needs to be done more effectively and more consistently? And you can just pick 2 or 3 big things in those areas, and that's a great way to start. We talk a little bit more about this towards the end, but there's some structure is always better than no structure, like having a starting point where you're thinking about these types of things and the outcomes that you want in all of these contexts will start to help you build that process and just work in real time to sort of deliver and make it better. You don't have to over-engineer it from jump or think, oh my gosh, I got to hire 4 more people to take on all these tasks. You can start really small and just identify 2 or 3 tasks in each area, or 2 or 3 metrics or outcomes that you want to start delivering on.
Perfect. And the other question was, the project manager, how much are they involved with after the onboarding is complete? And I think to the point that I mentioned earlier is obviously they're very involved during those first 6 to 8 weeks of onboarding, but then after that, it's really, we do monthly check-ins with all of our clients, and then we do 6-month, a little bit more detailed check-ins with our clients. And so, if the feedback's going well, then there's probably very limited interaction between the project managers back with the client. But whenever an issue arises, they're usually responding back that same day with, okay, let's talk about this, let's figure this out. And that's our goal, is any type of feedback should have a response every day.
Yeah, and I think, oh, sorry, Tom, did you have something?
Nope, just agreeing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of the things with the role definition here, if you do have a project manager that's not a part of the services team, it's not an accountant, one of the things I really try to do is set up that the primary relationship for the client is with the services team. The project manager or the account manager never wants to take away from that consulting relationship that's being built with the client. They don't want to be the person that is receiving questions about, hey, did this bill get paid? The goal is for them to be able to roll away from real-time communication and interaction with the client at the end of onboarding. And then they're available to step in for either the internal team or for the client if something comes up where more support is needed. So I always encourage the client, you have a relationship at the end of onboarding, you have a relationship now with your services team. Feel free to go to them first, but I am always available. You can contact me, please fill out the surveys. Jamie was saying we survey our clients monthly, we have that point of contact with them. So that's kind of one thing I'll look out for as I'm keeping my radar on. If we haven't heard from a client in a really, really long time on a survey, we have the 6-month check-ins to just sort of reach out and say, hey, how are things going? Is there anything bothering you? We also reach out to the client on any survey response that isn't a 10 out of 10, isn't like the highest score possible, and just say, hey, what could we be doing that could get that highest score for you? Because it's a really great way to proactively identify something that's maybe been hitting their brain for a little while and maybe they haven't had time to bring up in a meeting, and it keeps that 4 from turning into a 2 months down the road, 3 months down the road. And the client and the internal team, there's a lot of trust that gets built there by ensuring that the account manager isn't the person that comes in and just yells at the services team when something is wrong. We're a team and we work together to ensure that delivery to the client is happening proactively as much as possible.
Yeah. Lydia, if you want to introduce this next slide, and then I'll go ahead and jump to a follow-up polling question, and then you can continue.
All right, yeah, so these are 3 pieces of an effective client onboarding process that we're going to dive more deeply into.
Okay. Okay. Yep. So you can see the question up there. So I'll let people answer this. We'll give about a minute or so. But Lydia, if you just want to go ahead and people can answer and then listen to your
Great.
Listen to the content.
Yeah, I love having this question here because I think we talked a lot about the stakeholders and kind of where we want to go, and it's great to sort of hear if people are feeling like, you know what, I feel like my process is pretty solid. I feel like we're hitting some things that look pretty good. There might be a couple things here that we want to tweak, but overall, I feel like my process is looking pretty good. Or man, I'm starting to feel the need or identify some areas where we could grow. So I think this is a great spot to have it, and it's cool to see the results coming in real time. So yeah, as everyone is kind of starting to do those polls, we'll start to provide some scope on those 3 areas. So an effective client onboarding process is well integrated, and that is integrated among all stakeholders, so internally and externally. Just making sure that those processes are really clearly defined and achieving outcomes for all of those stakeholders or buckets, even if there's not an individual sitting in that seat. Clearly communicated, this is a big one. We'll talk more in detail about what that looks like, but this is what gives you the opportunity to be really proactive, as having some structure around communication. And this is what also gives you the ability to adapt in real time to your client's needs, to the firm needs, to those surprises that come up. I always say that onboarding is a little bit like an iceberg. You see the tip of it, and in the sales process, you get like an idea of how big that iceberg might be. But then as you get into the work, you get into the bookkeeping, your services team gets a look at the books. There's almost always surprises that come up. And if you have a really good communication structure for those touch points with the clients, and the services team, it makes the process really adaptable so that you can in real time solve problems as they arise.
Yeah. So as you see this, you can see that we've got 40% about or saying it's a high priority, and a little bit more than that saying some opportunity. I really expected higher for not planning to make changes, because we had 26% say they've already got documented and standard processes in place. So interesting that even though maybe they're saying, hey, we've already got a really good process, but still we're seeing opportunities to make improvements to that.
Yeah, that's really exciting for me, because I feel like one of the key things about the structure that we have in place for onboarding that makes it really strong is that it is flexible and adaptable. And that might sound inconsistent when I'm saying you want structure, you want a process, you want to know the workflows, your roles and responsibilities need to be really well defined. But I think we've all been in a situation where you're doing the kickoff call with the client, and you have a list of things that you want to complete in a certain order. And the client says, it's really important to me that we have a conversation about commission structure as soon as possible. Or I want to see my forecast next week. And that is not at all in the workflow that you have. Your dependencies are set up. Man, I've got to do these 5 things before. If you have that outline in place, and you can be adaptable in real time to create some of those early wins with the client. So maybe you're not showing them a full forecast, or maybe you don't have a fully fledged commission structure out in a week for the client, but you can find a way to start kind of creating some wins with them early on, so that they know that you've heard it's a priority, and you can start sharing where you're making progress towards that outcome, so that they know you haven't just forgotten about it. And then Jamie and Tom, you two are on the technical side of that and have dealt with that like in real time with the client. I know that that's what I make the system hopefully to be adaptable enough for, but you two probably have some thoughts on what that's like with the client when it comes to you.
Yeah, no, I think that this actually kind of plays into the question that just came up from Christy Glover. Was the question is okay, so a lot of this, if you think about onboarding, a lot of it is accounting and it is technical, but if you actually break down the onboarding process, and this is what we did when we brought Lydia in, is there are 1,000 things that go into it. It's not just like it sounds. You could probably explain onboarding very simply. You could be like, okay, yeah, we need to get up to date on their accounting and their software, but that goes into so many things. We need usernames, we need passwords, we need to make sure we understand the balance sheet, we need to make sure we understand the income statement, we need to make sure that we understand the journal entries that need to be done a month end. I could go on and on and on about all the things that are included in this. And so really what, you know, that's why every client is so different, is because some clients, it could just be one closing entry. It's just we just have to book depreciation at the end of the month. Some clients, it could be 30. And so it's the difference between those two clients that makes this process need to be well integrated. And that's essentially what Lydia does, is she takes those 100 steps and makes sure they're being done. Because, you know, if we just have an accountant doing this, it's they're gonna reach out to the accountant and be like, hey, have you done the account mapping yet? And the accountant's going to be like, no, I haven't done that yet. And be like, okay, I'll do it for you. And that's not what we want. We want the person who's on the account to do the account mapping, because they're going to learn from it. So what Lydia does is says, hey, is the account mapping done yet? No, I haven't had time to do that this week. Okay, when do you think you'll get that done? Because all these other things are waiting on that. We can't do the forecast. We can't have this conversation with the client until you do that account mapping. And so Lydia's the one holding the people accountable to what they need to get done, and really the glue that ties the whole thing together. And that comes back to the integration. So that's why we have a project manager who doesn't understand accounting, is because accountants, like I said, we had 3 different accountants in this role prior to Lydia, and they always leaned back on, I can do that for you. I can jump in and do that. And then 6 months down the road, the person who's running this role is still doing it for 10 accounts, and then they can't actually be the true project manager on it. So that's why we have this role, and why it's a non-accountant role.
Great. Oh, I think you're muted, Tom.
Yes, I was just gonna say, yes, I agree completely with what Jamie said, and just knowing all the different steps that have to happen. Because like you said, there's 1,000 things, but it's easy to do the things and miss stuff. And if I'm trying to onboard someone and I've got to constantly be thinking about what am I missing, it's hard. When we sit down with the project manager, like, okay, here are all the things that we do. It's just great to have that map. And if there are things you don't need to do for this client, great, cross them off, but you at least considered them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's where kind of the responsive, well, every client is different. How we're going to put structure into place. The reality is sometimes the order of the way you do things and receive information from a client can be very different client to client, but the tasks that are completed are usually the same. So if you can start with defining what are the things that we need to do every single time to have a successful onboarding and deliver this service for this client. What's the information that we need to know? What's the access that we need to have? What tasks need to be completed? Then that's where you get that dynamic flexibility of being able to go, okay, I can take this thing and I can move it up 2 weeks, or I can take this thing and I can move it back 3 weeks. But these 2 things have to be done on time. We have to have this access, and we need the senior accountant to do X, Y, Z. Otherwise, everything is falling off the rails. And if you can know that at the beginning of onboarding, you can know that in real time when you're making those decisions about how to deliver to the client's priorities when they tell you something is really important, that's where you get that adaptability in, and your system really starts to work for you in real time. Okay, great. We'll hit the next slide. So well integrated. This just really goes along with that definition of roles and stakeholders, or the buckets of where you need to kind of make sure people understand what their responsibilities are and who's doing what. The communication flow here is really, really important, and you want to make sure that all of these things are connected, that they know who each other is, the expectations are set about the roles, and then you can come back to that information when there is a potential point of conflict or something that just needs to be discussed, and maybe there's a different level of financial literacy or just differences in knowledge and experience that come into play. You get to kind of come back to that structure of who's responsible for what resources do we need to solve this problem or tackle this issue as it arises, and just making sure that everybody gets to know each other, sets expectations, and knows who's responsible for what is really, really key. We hit on this a lot already, so Tom and Jamie, I don't know if you have anything to add to this, but.
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, we've already spent a good amount of time on this.
Yeah.
So.
Great, I'll go ahead and move on. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in. We can hit them. Next, clearly communicated, and here's where some of that structure starts to come into play. We've talked really high level about a few things and shared some tidbits about how we do things here at Summit, but the clear communication is, I think, just really the grease that keeps the machine running. If it's not there, those cogs are going to stop. They're going to get grindy. They may still move, but not as well and as efficiently as we want them to. And you're going to start to see the the effect and the outcomes that you're looking for. They're going to not be as clean, they're going to not be as high quality, they might be missing some key things that the client asked for. So that real-time communication and having some structure around that is super important. Setting expectations, we really try to do this in our kickoff call, and that is roles as well as communication expectations. Jamie does a really good job of this, and I have tried to emulate him in kickoff calls. We basically kind of copied the way he has that conversation with clients, just so that we let them know from jump what type of communication style works well for us, because our services team is getting tons of emails related to bookkeeping and accounting. They're getting vendor bills, they're getting questions from customers about statuses of invoices, pulling information in for processing payroll, and if a client has an important question that they shoot into an email, it's likely going to get lost. So we try to set those expectations really clearly from jump with the client, and then go back to them if we ever need to reset. Just kind of make sure everybody's on the same page. Setting milestones, this is really, really key. This is what lets you know if you're on or off track. And this is different than deliverables. This is a little bit of a project management term. And I think Jamie and I and the leadership team spent a lot of time kind of talking about it as we were building the structure. You know, we have this deliverable of financial statements. That is the last thing that we give to the client. We use that to mark the end of the onboarding. But what are the really critical things that need to get done along the way to ensure that we deliver, we get that deliverable done within 6 to 8 weeks, which was our goal for onboarding. And then when you work backwards and you identify what those milestones are, sometimes they overlap with deliverables too, but once you know what they are, those are the pieces of the puzzle of your process that give you that flexibility and let you know right away in real time if something's going to go wrong, and then you can reset expectations with everybody. We tell clients usually in week 2 or 3 if we think that their onboarding is going to extend beyond the 8 weeks. We say, hey, XYZ occurred that delayed us a little bit, and we think it's probably going to take us 10 weeks to complete onboarding. So we try and have that conversation early, and the milestones are what gives us the flexibility to be able to do that, and the binoculars to be able to see what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, I think with the milestones and the deliverables, I think to me this was a key thing we learned was a lot of feedback we got was, you know, people felt like a lot of the during onboarding feedback we would get would people say, it feels like it's going okay. Like, I feel like we're getting stuff done, but there was no markers in the sand. Like, you think about you're getting a house built, you get the house built, you see the frame go up, and you're like, sweet, I can actually see what my house is going to look like now. And then you see the paint color go on, like, okay, I know my house is going to be this color. Where we would just kind of go for the 8 weeks, and then at the end be like, all right, we're done, here's your financial statements, where, you know, we kind of identified those milestones throughout so they could see that stuff was being done. Like, for example, a forecast. Hey, we have your first draft of the forecast done. That's awesome. We're in week 4 and we have your forecast done. And we kind of have those marks along the way to let them know ahead of time, before we even start, first week, first day, these are the milestones you're going to see, and this is when we hope to hit these things. And then they know what to look for, and they know, okay, we're in week 3 and we just saw the forecast. That's awesome, they're ahead. Or we're in week 6 and we just saw a forecast. Why is this going slow? And maybe it's going slow because we need to meet with their marketing team, and their marketing team, we can't find any time with them. So it's not always on us, but it allows them to push back and be like, yeah, we really want to get you a forecast, but we can't get hold of Bob in marketing. And they're like, well, I'll talk to him, I'll make sure that happens, because this is really important for us to see our financial statements. And so it allowed us to put those markers in the sand, as opposed to just being like, don't look at the man behind the curtain until the very end, and then here we are, we're done, we finished this, you know. So we wanted to make sure we had markings along the way.
Yeah, and I'll give an example, because I think this might be something where people are kind of thinking like, well, what is the difference between a milestone and a deliverable? I don't understand. So, for example, we have our financial statements with KPIs. That's the deliverable that we're going to give to the client. In order to get that done, we have to map accounts in one of our systems called Reach. It's a software-related task that has to be done by the accountants, and sometimes our IT team comes in and supports. That mapping is really key to getting that done. If for whatever reason we know we're going to be backed up on that milestone of mapping accounts, we know it's also going to push out the timeline for that deliverable of financial statements. So if we know all the things that go into and all the information that we need to map the accounts, you get to the financial statements. If any part of that is held up, it gives us a really accurate picture of how long it's actually going to take us to get to financials. So some of those milestones are internal. Some of them we share with the client. We have a we'll talk a little bit more about this tracking and reporting, but we have screenshots of our tools that we send to the client every week so they can see how we're progressing. And we have a lot of it that we administer behind the scenes that we don't tell them everything about it. We can be transparent about it if they want to know, but some of it is our internal processes where this conversation has to happen between the accountant and our IT team in order to get things set up, and we don't bog the client down with that unless they're curious and they want to know. We'll tell them, but it lets us have that milestone in place to know if we're going to be off track and communicate expectations in real time.
Yep.
Great. The other one is meetings. There is absolutely nothing that substitutes seeing someone face to face and being able to problem solve and build a relationship in real time. So just having a structure and a cadence and agendas for what you're going to do in meetings is really, really key internally and externally with the client. This is actually something we've started to see from clients probably in the last 6 months asking for specific meeting agendas, and I think it's pretty cool. I think it shows that we're getting a different level of engagement, I think, in our clients in the process. Like they're wanting to know, hey, what's going to happen in this meeting next week? We know we're working on forecast, but what are we going to be talking about? Can I see it a little sooner? Can I be more prepared for this meeting? So I think we're just starting to kind of see the importance of that. And then internally, those internal meetings when you're connecting with your services team, the project management team, or whoever is responsible for that, even if it's just dedicated work time, if you're a 1 or 2 person show, having that scheduled and clearly defined on your calendar to this day, I'm going to be checking in on XYZ milestones and deliverables and making sure we're on track. And then communicating out with all of the stakeholders or whatever stakeholders are needed to make sure that we're staying on track is super key. So that cadence of meetings and communication is really, really critical.
So Lydia, as you go, if you want to introduce the next slide, let me put up the final polling question that we have for today. And then just a reminder, we've got about 2 minutes until you need to wrap up.
Perfect. Yep, here we are. Tommy told me this would happen. Got really excited about it.
Okay, so do you want to introduce what's on here since people won't be able to see it once the polling question is up?
Yep, so consistent and adaptable. These are examples of how you make the system consistent and adaptable. So go ahead and pull the question up and then I'll start.
It is up. So people will have just about a minute. Yep, we're good.
Okay, great. So one of the big things that helps make your onboarding program consistent and adaptable is having a resources library. And you can do this in real time as you're building things. This enables your team internally to upsell, to hand off work as needed, and avoid scope creep. So make sure that you have a definition of services that the whole team knows and understands. It's really, really key, as well as process documentation. Those resources are pretty critical. Templates. You can use Excel, you can use Asana, you can use Smartsheet, you can use ClickUp, you can use a project management tool or not. Basically, starting with some structure instead of no structure is what we want to have. Templates for emails, communications, meeting agendas, presentations are pretty key resources that will help make your life easier. We talked about internal check-in meetings and then building in that flexibility. I think we kind of hit pretty well. So you have enough structure that you understand the system well enough to be able to adapt in real time when you need to.
Okay, about 10 more seconds, and I'm going to go ahead and close this poll.
Okay, great.
Okay, so about half the people are with firms less than, or 10 people or less, and the remainder either not with firms or bigger. So some of the questions around, hey, if we're smaller, can 2 people do this role? Seems really good for this audience.
Mm-hmm. Yep, great. And this last slide is just kind of helping you get started. Where do we go from here? What needs to be done next? You can start small. Some is better than none. Use your culture and services as a guide for creating milestones. Trust your instincts. You know what needs to be done, so just start there. Stay focused on the outcomes to avoid over-engineering. That's pretty key. It is really easy to create boxes that need to be checked, but if you stay focused on the outcomes and what's actually being delivered, that'll help. And then having high-level summaries available for anyone outside of the project management team that just sort of needs to know what impacts them is also really helpful, and kind of streamlining things and making sure your communications are clear and concise.
Yeah.
Great.
So the couple final questions. Do we have a template for the onboarding process that we can share? I assume we have. Well, you'll have to tell me. Is there something that we could put in a slide before we send out the slides to give an idea what the PM process looks like? Okay.
Yep, we can do that for sure. Yeah, we can add it in.
Okay, this one I'll just have to read because I haven't pre-read it. Okay, how do you effectively create a consistent onboarding system when your client base has a vast difference in the level of services they need? For example, some clients just need assistance with payroll processing, others need, and then list lots of different services provided.
Great. So you build the steps for each service. So you start with defining the service and then work backwards for what information do you need, what tasks need to be completed so that you can deliver that service ongoing. And that's the end point of onboarding work, is when you're ready to deliver that service ongoing in a consistent cadence.
Yeah, and I would say, to your credit, having a complete PM set for the different services you provide makes it easy to then say, well, we don't need access to these couple of systems because we're not being involved in those. And that's really easy to say we've considered it and don't need that. It's still important to have that in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
okay.
a really big part of that adaptability too, because not every client selects the same services, which is really good. For who asked that question, really great thing to call out. And that's what gives you some of that flexibility. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I think the last one I'll address here is what will we include in the executive summary reports and communications. Mm-hmm. And I know I see those, and each week they go out and are a status of here's where we are and here's what we still need. And that is so valuable when you've said from the beginning, we need tax returns, we need bank logins, things like that, to go back and say, hey, here's where it is. And to Jamie's point, or I think you made this, Lydia, in redoing the accounts, it was really important to getting things into reach. And so early on, you can say, hey, well, we don't have access to your accounting system. Let me just tell you, that's really going to hold us up. So if that takes you 3-4 weeks to get, we're not going to be done in 6 to 8 weeks. And that's the kind of stuff that's in that communication that we can reinforce.
Mm-hmm. I can share an example of the template that we use for that executive communication, because there's just a few buckets that we call out, and it's pretty flexible for whatever deliverables or milestones you all end up with, or the way that you deliver your services.
That would
so we
be
can
great.
put that into the slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to jump to the next slide, then I'll go ahead and have us wrap this up. So
Great.
If people want to continue learning, we've got a couple different ways of doing it. Jamie hosts the Modern CPA Success Show, and that's one you can find on YouTube, and you'll find clients, employees, other topics that we have that we cover those. So I would encourage people to go there. Additionally, to be more interactive, there's a Slack CFO community that we would encourage people to join. Lots of good conversation between different accountants asking questions. Well over 100 people are part of this, and you've got a 1 month free access with a code that you have there. And then finally, I'll promote our course that we have. So we have a pretty intensive virtual CFO playbook course. 15 different modules. That onboarding is one of the ones that we talk about within there, but everything that we do delivering CFO services to clients, we go through with templates, with pricing tools, with all sorts of things that are in there. That also comes with an hour of free coaching when you complete the class, the free Slack community that I mentioned before, plus discounts on tools and things like that. So if virtual CFO service is something that you're interested in offering, I would really highly encourage this to be there. Jamie and Lydia, thank you very much for presenting today. This was really helpful, and we could tell from the very first question, people had a lot of interest in the onboarding process. So thanks for sharing that expertise with us.
Great. It was fun to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.